Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're going to kick off a new topic. We're going to talk about how to generate a procedural texture on the fly. What we're going to do is create a star field, and we're going to show you how we can animate this star field so that it makes our ship look as if it's flying through space. Remember, as you may recall, hey, I got an arrow on the screen. Let me go ahead and click up here so the arrow goes away. There we go. So if you guys recall, we have a spaceship. There is our super sophisticated spaceship, and we have the ability to move it around the screen as, we're flying it, but we need it to look as if we're traveling through space, and the best way to do this is to have our star field animated up underneath us. And of course, that's going to give us the sense of motion. So by the end of this video, you're going to know how to not only generate a procedural texture, but how you can go about animating it as well. And you're going to find all of this to be quite simple. Now, before Logan jumps in and starts coding everything, I want to spend just a couple of minutes and talk about the approach. How are we going to do this? It's actually quite simple. We're going to start out by creating a new instance of a texture 2D. And we're not loading a texture in it, and by creating a new instance, basically what we get is a defaulted value texture. And what I mean by that is our RGB values are all set to 0 for every pixel on this thing, so it's black, good. And our alpha value for every single pixel is also set to 0. So it's completely transparent. How convenient. So if we wanted to layer these textures, it's going to work out quite nicely for us. So, of course, when we generate the new instance of the texture 2D, we're going to specify things like a width and a height. And by specifying a width and a height, we can simply multiply these two guys together, and we can come up with the total number of pixels that we have. Simple enough. Now, with the total number of pixels, we could create a new array that is just filled with a bunch of color elements in there. And the number of elements that we have will be, of course, the total number of pixels. Or we could do get data and dump that into an array. And I believe, Logan, you're going to take the get data approach, even though this is all black, but just in case in the future we want to expand on this and use a texture that already has color data on it.
Exactly, because I needed to initialize the elements in the array somehow. And that would be either with an if-else as we generate a star or just initialize to transparent. I opted to go with loading all of the texture data into it, even though we know that all the pixels are going to be transparent, going ahead and loading all of those with a getData call anyway. And the advantage there is if we ever change the star field to be applied to an existing texture instead of a newly created one, we could actually draw the star pixels on top of existing texture data.
You got it. Now here we are. I've drawn out a very quick array demonstrating our RGB and our alpha values. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to iterate in a loop through each of our pixels. Remember, each one of these guys represents the color information and alpha for a single pixel. We're going to walk through each one, and we're going to generate a random number inside each iteration. And we're going to compare that random number against a density, I just said that with the two finger quotes around it, a density setting that we're going to send in. That density setting is going to allow us to basically control how dense the star field is going to be. Whatever random number is generated, we're going to compare that against the density to see if this number is less than the density value we send in. And if it is less, then we're going to set information in here so that it is no longer 0, 0, 0. We actually have a star. So basically, it's going to look like this. It's as if we were walking through each of our pixels and we're just randomly saying, generate a number, and is it less than the density? Yes. Aha. Let's go ahead and put a star there. But we're going to set the density setting so low because we don't want, a solid white sheet, okay? A billion stars. We don't want that. We just want a few scattered stars, so it looks really nice.
Exactly, because, just look at the width and height of whatever texture you end up using. We'll have dimensions that we use for ours. Multiply those together, and chances are you'll end up with several thousand pixels.
Right.
Now, if you used a probability value of something like 1 and 2, 50%, or 1 and 3, a 30% chance, that means every third pixel would be filled, which is actually going to look more like TV static than a star field.
Precisely. So there we go. We've just walked through all of our pixels, and each time we've done our probability test, and we've determined if we needed to set that pixel or not. Now, the pixels are very small. Okay, running 800 by 600, we're looking at a very small white dot for our star. we need it to be just a tad bit bigger. So instead of worrying about handling anything complicated in regards to making, a scaled up set of pixels to imitate a star, what we're going to do is we're going to generate this texture as a small texture and take advantage of sprite batch and have it basically scale up the look of these pixels when we draw the image. So when we draw the image, let me see if my eraser wants to cooperate today. Hey, what do you know it does? It's such a shot in the dark if we're going to have an eraser, Logan?
That's all just what mood Photoshop's in.
Pretty much. So let's go ahead and clear that off. So again, a very small texture, but when we draw it in our draw method, we're going to scale it. And then we're just going to let the sprite batch take care of all the filtering for us so that our stars are a bit bigger.
And again, this makes it so that a very simple drawing operation, that is just setting individual pixels on the texture, they can get nicely scaled up. So instead of single 1 pixel dots, we have everything scaled up. We're going to scale by roughly a factor of 3 just based on the size of the star field we make versus the size of our screen resolution. So we get roughly 3 pixel diameter stars with soft edges based on the filtering that the hardware uses to scale the texture.
Precisely. Now, we've got a texture. How are we going to make it move? This is actually pretty simple. Let's think about it. Right now, with the final part of this graphic that I just drew, I basically drew what? The bounds of the screen, right? So in drawing that, all we're doing is positioning a texture. In positioning the texture, we specified an X and Y coordinate. So with this X and Y coordinate, where did we specify? Right here, 0, 0. Now, in order to make our ship look like it's moving forward, we need to have the star field moving down. To have the star field moving down, we don't need to worry about X. X is just going to stay at 0 because our star field will always be butted up to the left-hand side of the screen. All we need to worry about is our Y value. So our Y value is going to be increasing, right? So to start out, by having that Y value increase and update all the time, what are we going to have? Well, we're going to have a texture that will slide down the screen, but I'll do a bunch of screen drawings here, so we're about to see a whole bunch of rectangles. Here we are with our screen, and let's say the next iteration it's moved this far. Let's say on the next iteration it's now moved, now of course I am exaggerating this like crazy. It's moved this far. What's happening? We're left with nothing back here. It's just black, okay, or whatever background we decided to draw.
Exactly, because we're starting to move the starfield texture off screen.
Exactly. Now, it's going to finally get to a point where, so here we are with our screen, the texture just slid off the screen. And when it slides off the screen, we're going to set it up so that it is then going to snap back to 0, 0, which means it'll be drawn from the upper left-hand corner, and it's going to fill the entire screen. That's not good. I mean, it's good that we now have our starfield back, but we basically watched it slide off screen, and then it got to the very bottom, our screen was just black. And then, boom, we had stars again. And then it slid off the screen again. So how are we going to fix this and make it look right? Actually pretty simple. What we're going to do is, again, here I am drawing the screen, and we've got all of our stars on it. So we're drawing at 0, 0. Now, once I've drawn the texture at 0, 0, I'm then going to turn around and I'm going to draw it again. But it's going to be at 0, and a new Y position. This Y position is going to be the Y position that I drew the first instance of the texture at, minus our screen's height. So by taking the screen height and subtracting that away from the Y value we just used for the first texture, that puts us up here. Okay, so one screen above, if you will. And we'll draw that. So you might be thinking, all right, that's good, but I don't see anything, so I don't see what the point is. Well, what's going to happen if we move, let's say we update to the next instance, and we have moved this guy down to there. So now this is our value. So if we subtract our screen height, we're now drawing our second texture, which is the same texture. We're drawing it right here, but look at this. It comes down to right here now. So instead of getting black in this gap right here, if we set our background color to black, we're now actually seeing this texture that we are redrawing fill in that space. So that's going to look nice. And because the textures the texture is comprised of stars that are, faint, and there's not billions of them, we don't see any sort of repeat type problem. There's no tiling issues.
Exactly. If we had drawn like a picture of a cat instead of the picture of stars, it'd be obvious where the tile point is. But like you said, since it's very unlikely that you'd have more than one star per line of pixels across the texture, you have no bearing to see what would be a wrapping point or not. You just see more stars appear on screen, and you see that as a correct result. It just looks like you have a never-ending stream of stars that scroll across the screen.
Exactly. So when we finally get, so there's our screen. We finally get to the position. Let's say here we are one right before we go off. So there's our texture down there.
Where in our previous scenario we had an almost completely blank screen because our star texture had moved off of it.
Instead, we're going to take the Y value that we used to draw this texture right here, subtract away our screen height, and then which puts us right here, and then we're going to draw the texture again, the same texture, which will fill all of that area. I'm trying to color that in because it's all the way down to the line there. And then when we go to the next frame, and the star is all the way off, basically the top one's now filling it, and then the next one, this guy's going to simply pop back on right here, and our second texture is going to be back up here.
But because they're really the exact same texture, no pop is perceived.
Exactly.
Because the one snaps back up to the top, but it's the same set of pixels, so no pixels appear to move.
That's right. Now, as far as new methods or new functions that you guys are going to be introduced to, you have seen the sprite batches, the texture 2Ds get data. And now we're going to take a look at the texture 2D's set data for taking our array of information and setting that into the texture.
Exactly, because in the past we were only interested in reading pixel data, and we had to load it into an array before we could access individual pixels. And the same applies to writing to a texture. We still use an array to work with the individual pixel values, but we need to make sure we take that array and dump it back into the texture in order to use that data as a texture.
Exactly. Okay, so this is pretty much what we're going to do in the next video. Logan is going to put together the scrolling star field.